Hey everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balkavage. We're back for another edition of the Thyroid Answers podcast. And today we've got another guest. She is a functional medicine nutritionist, I believe would be the official title, but she may correct me. And she is a podcast host. She's got her own podcast called the Less Stressed Life podcast. I've actually been invited to be a guest on that podcast, and I'm not sure how well it was received, but I always assume that it was well received. So Christa, thank you for coming on the Thyroid Answers podcast. I think I even forgot to say your full name, right? Christa Biegler?
Yeah, Christa
Biegler. And we're going to chat today about minerals. But before we do that, why don't you give the audience members a little bit of background on who the heck Christa is and why we should listen to Christa?
Sure. Well, I've been in private practice since about 2015. Before that, I was in clinical care doing a variety of things, but I've been doing integrative nutrition. And I started out in like food sensitivity world, which is funny because now I do the exact opposite to try to overcome food sensitivities. So my shtick is that we can overcome food sensitivities and fatigue without massive restriction. We're coming from a history in functional medicine where we've been doing all these elimination diets and things for years, and this is just not serving people. And we're kind of in this undernourished space. So that's an area I'm passionate about. And then we're going to talk about this other area that's really been a blossoming passion for me, because if your thyroid is sluggish, that's how I state it. But if your thyroid is subclinically off, then there's relapse potential for all the things going on gut-wise, et cetera. So that was driving me crazy as a practitioner because I'm an achiever, an Enneagram 3. So I like to think about, to know thyself. It affects how you have relationships with other people and yourself, but I like to achieve. So it was really annoying for me if people would get better and then some of them would start to backslide. So I was looking for measurements of how we can look at stress, and minerals came into play because when you have stress, you deplete your minerals. So that kind of brings us to where we are today.
All right. Well, I do want to ask you a question because I think it's important, and you brought it up. So I'm going to ask you about it. And you talked about my question is, why is diet elimination bad? I have a good reason for why it is, but you brought it up. It's one of the things you're passionate about. So let's just, before we get into the meat of the podcast, let's talk about it. Why? Because it is a thing we do in functional medicine often, is you see people doing more restriction. Typically, we see somebody say, well, you got health issues, especially in thyroid world. Don't eat gluten, so they go gluten-free and they feel a little bit better, and then they're still having some struggles. So somebody says, well, you should probably remove dairy too. So they remove dairy, and so now they're gluten and dairy-free, and they feel better, and then they don't feel so good, and then they say, okay, you should remove all grain products from your diet, and they've removed that, and it just goes on and on and on and on. And while I do think that modifying somebody's diet is beneficial, and what that means can be a little bit different, it's a tool and not a lifestyle many times, unless what we're restricting is a bunch of crappy Frankenfood. But why do you see what we often do in functional medicine, which is put somebody on a restrictive type diet? Why is it potentially problematic? Is it always problematic? Is it sometimes problematic? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to start with, is it always or sometimes problematic? And then let me kind of crack it open because it's a big topic. So it has the most utility when you cross the autoimmune threshold. We have seen, I will occasionally still do some food sensitivity work if I'm going to get the most ROI. But I think food sensitivities are not the ultimate root cause. What's creating food sensitivities is immune system dysfunction. Immune system dysfunction is caused by a variety of things, but the big arms, in my opinion, are gut dysbiosis and nervous system. In addition to toxic burden, blood sugar stuff, all of that will inform the immune system. So nutrition and nervous system, or I'm calling nutrition, gut dysbiosis, toxic burden. Are you nourishing, digesting, absorbing foods? That's all informing the immune system. The immune system feels threatened. If the innate immune system is out of balance, Th1, Th2 is out of balance, that will create food sensitivity type reactions. So for me, this is challenging for people because they restrict the food and maybe they feel better, right? And so what what is human behavior? I like to think about that we're just humans all the time. And so what's our human behavior? Our human behavior is to do more of the thing that makes us feel better, right? So often, and part of my story, maybe we'll get into this a little bit too, is, you have good intentions sometimes when you start something. So when I'm thinking about food stuff, I always say, are you doing an intentional experiment for a few weeks? Or do you have some food relationship issues? And so there's other things that can play in there. And how many people have food relationship issues? A lot of the population, right? Can we maybe even state maybe the majority almost have a food relationship issue because of diet stuff in history. So anyway, what can happen is you can start out with a good intention, like I'm going to just try this out, but that you don't really have an exit strategy or a plan. And so what happens for some people, and again, this is the lens I'm looking through. Who do you think I talk to? These people, right? So I'm a little bit biased potentially for this, because people might come at me and say, oh, well, I did this diet and I felt great. Cool. Why did you feel good? Did you feel good because you're on a whole food diet without a bunch of toxic burden? And like you said, frankenfood, right? That's good for everybody to do most of the time, right? I'm a fan of most of the time. I don't think perfection exists. And I think we agree on this pretty well, which is cool. I'm a most of the time person. And if something is going to increase a lot of stress, I'm usually going to be against it. And that's part of figuring that out with someone initially. It's like, if this is going to increase your stress, even if it could give you some good ROI, I'm going to skip over it and do other things that will help instead. So anyway, so people do this, they do more of it. And before you know it, they're really restricting. And even in my own story in 2015-ish, I had a couple small kids. I was transitioning from working contract work into private practice. So, like if in retrospect, there was more stress there. I broke out with this severe eczema reaction around my eye and then my neck. And then around the same time, I was kind of interested in this topic. So as humans do, they get excited about a test, they do a test. And then I was like, these are the foods I eat all the time, which means something separate also. If you want to talk about it, I'm sure you know, right? But if we need to talk about that with people. So I did a short-term protocol, because sometimes people will restrict for months. And I think that can be an issue if you're restricting, you're getting less and less nutrients. Because if part of this was gut stuff in the first place, you already weren't digesting, absorbing nutrients. So now you have less and less nutrients. What I'm seeing is more adrenal issues. Anyway, so I did this food protocol. I'm broken out in a rash. I'm not doing well, right? I do this food protocol, and after the food protocol, or like after the first couple of weeks, I remember, and I was hungry. I'm sure my blood sugar was all messed up, right? I remember sticking my hand into a package of pecans, eating them, and my eye swelling up, which had never happened before that. So I'd actually created a worse situation. I'd actually created even more immune system dysfunction with that restriction. And I only share that because that happens to a lot of people. It doesn't happen to everybody, right? It doesn't happen to everybody, but it can happen to a lot of people. We actually make our sensitivities worse by removing that and not actually dealing with the root causes. If I had to summarize it in one line, most of the time a food sensitivity or whatnot is not a root cause, but most of the time we should be on a whole healthful diet. But when I die, put on my tombstone, you must digest your food. And everyone thinks they digest better than they do. And I don't think that they do at all.
Yeah. And I'd agree with that. I mean, I think restrictive diets, restricting something is a tool, right? Not the tool, and it's not a lifestyle. And I don't even remember if we talked about this on your podcast or not, but one of the big challenges becomes the food, as you said, is probably not the root issue. Root, it doesn't matter, right? It's the same idea, tomato. So the key is, why are some of the foods, especially healthy foods, become reactive? And I agree. It comes down to, what is my digestive capacity to begin with? If I don't have appropriate stomach acid, if I don't have appropriate biophysiology, appropriate release of digestive enzymes, then I'm going to potentially have poor digestion. If I have poor digestion, that can lead to bacterial overgrowth or bacterial imbalances, not necessarily pathogenic, but even what we call our commensal bacteria, the bacteria that should live there. Too much of a good thing or too little of a good thing creates a problem. And so now we have dysbiosis. Now we start to lose some of the integrity of what's going on between the cells. We lose the integrity of the GI tract. And now poorly digested proteins or peptides can start to cross the barrier. And it's typically going to be whatever you eat in the greatest concentration are the things that are more likely to then start triggering immune related problems. And now you're going to say, whoa, I'm sensitive to that food. So I'm going to remove that food and I'll replace it with a higher level of this other food. And now you start eating higher quantities of something else without proper digestion. And guess what? Now I'm doing this. Now I can't eat that. Now I can't eat this. And before you know it, you're down to like chicken and water, and you're still not unhappy.
Not a way to live, right?
Yeah. And the tie, and we'll tie this to, like, you were talking about immune issues, and you think you probably understand that tie. Once you have that immune dysregulation, and once you start to create dysbiosis in the bowel, it has a big impact on the immune system, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think they're pretty much intertwined with each other, right? We have a lot of immune cells inside the gut. And to even tie it into thyroid, if you're dealing with sluggish thyroid and you have one of the side effects is slow motility, it just perturbs this even more. And you brought up a lot of different ways that people digest poorly. You know, if you have reduced your protein intake because you feel like protein sits like a rock, you probably have low stomach acid. Why do you have low stomach acid? Well, stress causes low stomach acid. Different pathogens cause low stomach acid. Low minerals can cause low stomach acid. If you have to use the bathroom really quickly after a meal, and that meal maybe is something that has more fat content in it, well, then maybe your liver isn't producing bile, or you're not storing it in your gallbladder well. Or if you don't have a gallbladder, you don't have a good storage form of that. Maybe it's sluggish from hormonal birth control or other things or stress or whatever. Maybe you have sludgy bile, right? So all of these little things. Oh, the big one, right? When people do, I have some feelings about this. When people do autoimmune paleo, which even the people who were really big on autoimmune paleo, which is, when did it have its heyday? Maybe 8 years ago.
Yeah, I'd say 8 to 10 years ago.
Yeah, I agree. So even the people who were big influencers around autoimmune paleo have kind of quietly said, like, this, we don't want you to restrict forever. I mean, some of the big people in that space have even said so. So my feelings about autoimmune paleo is that this could be an okay experiment if someone wants to do it and see how you feel, right? It's about how it depends on what your baseline food relationship is, right? If you're in this like constant restrictive cycle, because people have this cycle, that's an issue. But when people restrict all these you brought this up earlier, all the grains and all the things, if you've got gut dysbiosis, you're not going to digest carbs very well, right? Like, you should be able to digest carbs well because you have good pancreatic enzyme function. And there's other things that are just unfortunately really common, right? Like a little bit of like mold exposure, like I would just call it aggressive fungus because I don't like to get psycho about it. I'm just like, let's figure this out and like not get too crazy if we can avoid it. But just that alone, when we reduce that, if people have like low levels of stuff in their body, it can make you feel a lot better. So I always like to say, but why? But why? But why? I think most good practitioners do. And so I just don't think a food sensitivity is a end all be all root cause. I don't think a B12 deficiency is an end all be all root cause, back to low stomach acid, and many other nutrient deficiencies either.
Yeah. And I think sometimes that the deficiency thing, right? Like everything, you have food sensitivities, you have to remove everything. That's problematic because as you reduce food, you have reduced bacterial diversity, and now you start to have more and more issues. And when we look, and we'll probably dig into this a little bit later as we get more into minerals, I think we've created a big problem, and that is people's addiction to supplementation. Because as practitioners, we may look at something and, like, let's say an organic acid test is a great example of this, because you get an organic acid panel back and one of the companies says, hey, based on your results, here's the micronutrients you need. And somebody gets those micronutrients, starts taking, well, I have a B12 deficiency. Well, I have a B6 deficiency. I have a magnesium deficiency. I have this deficiency. I have that deficiency. I need all these supplements. When we should really ask the better question, which is, why would you be deficient in all of those things? Is it because you have poor nutrition, or things you don't have you're not eating quality food? Is it because you have poor digestion? Is it because you have dysbiosis? Is it because of whatever? If you were deficient in one micronutrient, yeah, okay, maybe that makes sense. But when it's 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 things, solution is not just take a multivitamin and that's going to fix it. The question should be, what's not appropriate here? Is it what I'm eating, how I'm digesting, the bacteria in my gut, or something else, right? That we have to ask that question before. And instead, sometimes what we do is we tell people, well, you have a B12 deficiency or a B9 deficiency. And so now they think they can never give it up. And the more they take, the better. And when you start to realize, oh, wait a second, you're taking 30 different supplements a day. Why do you need it? I need them all. Well, if you need that many, you're not doing functional medicine. You're doing greenwashing of allopathic medicine.
Mhm.
And that's sometimes not only not better, but sometimes worse.
Yeah, I didn't even bring that to the table as part of one of the conversations about why I'm in the minerals now more than I was before, and how I'm looking at differently. And actually, it's funny because when I first started learning about it, in some capacity. So when early in practice, I was doing different kind of food sensitivity work, some gut work, a lot of comprehensive micronutrient testing, and people get great results, and that's great, right? But I'm very sensitive to this over supplementation thing, and the fact that and this like illusion that we're not going to get off supplements. Every time someone asks me, am I going to be on this forever? Like, ooh, I just kind of bristle up. And I think we are built out of our own experiences. So my earliest experiences with quote unquote functional medicine, this is what I thought it was way back when I was in college. And my now spouse was seeing functional medicine providers at that time. And you would go to this person, you would spend about $700, mostly in supplements. And then you came back when you feel like it. I don't like this approach. I think this is a real crappy approach and not a sustainable one. And there's a very certain kind of clientele that ends up going back there again and again and again. But I kind of loathe like these very extensive supplement graveyards. I have a lot of empathy for this, and I may piss some people off when I say this, but this is where I was first kind of introduced to this. It was actually through my spouse's chiropractor, and then I ended up going to a lot of events with them around energy and muscle testing, and there was no exit strategy with those supplementation. So anyway, my point is that this happens all the time, and there's a lot of quote unquote functional providers that I loved how you said it, like greenwashing allopathic medicine, that are still kind of functioning like they're like it's like, here's the symptom, here's the treatment for it. And there's maybe like a little bit of room for that, but I think you have to be looking, I'm sure you agree, right, as the holistic big picture, right? And so if you're not digesting, you're not going to absorb and have any of those nutrients. And so that was part of the reason that I abandoned comprehensive micronutrient testing, not because it wasn't effective or useful or interesting, but it felt like a bit of, if people go on things and then just stay on things, you can create other deficiencies, because almost everything is a different kind of reaction, right? And an antagonistic or protagonistic reaction. So like if you take CoQ10 for too long, don't quote me, but like you'll create a deficiency in copper sometimes. And I think like B5, like really, really high doses. I had a really incredible micronutrient mentor who was just like a chiropractor and dietitian. And maybe you know him, but he was incredible. But my point is, I agree with you wholeheartedly that I don't love over supplementation. And I like when you can tell when a supplement is working for you. And I always pose that to people. If you've been taking this thing for this long and you don't see it making a difference, why don't you come off of it and see if you see any changes? So.
And I agree with that strategy, because I like to be more of a minimalist with supplementation, just like a change in diet or restrictive diet. It's a tool to see what changes. Using supplementation is a strategy to try and make a change, but it's not a lifestyle either, right? There are some things that we might consider as a benefit using, I should say, supportively, but if the solution to improving your health is tons of supplementation, that's potentially problematic, and I recommend against it. So, but we're going to get into nourishment. Good one. All right, so we're going to get into minerals. That's what we wanted to get into, the meat of it. We're already half an hour in, and we haven't even gotten to it yet. So let's let's talk. You were doing micronutrient testing, and for the listener, kind of tell them what micronutrient testing kind of means, because some people may not be familiar with it. And then how did that lead you? What drove you away from micronutrient testing and towards really doing a deeper dive into minerals?
Okay. So first micronutrient testing, then I'm going to give you a little bullet point on my history and how that all kind of like wrapped into it a little bit. So micronutrient testing, this is a good question because sometimes when we talk about things here, people think that they can go to their provider and ask for that, and that's not exactly the case. So let me give you the landscape of micronutrient testing as I see it. If you go to any doctor, you can ask for certain micronutrients. What's common to be tested is, okay, you're not automatically going to ever be tested for this, just so we're clear. Your audience probably all knows that, but you can ask for maybe vitamin D, maybe vitamin B12, maybe some others, but probably not. Like those are the big ones. And I remember my mom being hospitalized a few years ago, and I wanted them to pull a D and they just couldn't even find it to order it. So pretty uncommon. There's a couple, there might be three.
And let me interrupt you for a second, because you hit three big ones. I want to give you my opinion on why it's a problem when you ask a general practitioner to do it, and then you give me your take. So when these are, and you're exactly right. These are like the three big things that somebody's going to test you for: B9, B12, vitamin D. And the problem becomes vitamin D testing is not very, the way we do it currently is, not, in my opinion, is not very good. What we're testing is one marker, 25-OHD, which is in the middle of the whole process. So we're not testing anything else. We just assume because it's low, that it's low and you're deficient, but we don't realize that it could be low because there's not enough magnesium to convert vitamin D from the sun or from your supplements or from your food into 25-OHD. It could be low because there is problems at the liver where you can't generate it. It could be low because you've got blood sugar, inflammatory, thyroid issues going on. And so vitamin D is going to the adipose tissue to help deal with, I got to create space. I got to kind of tamp down this adipose inflammation. It could be low because the body's deactivating because you're taking too much. And it could be low because you're over converting it to the active form of vitamin D, 125 vitamin D, which once that's elevated, suppresses for conversion of vitamin D to 25 vitamin D. So and one more piece, we don't measure free vitamin D, which is actually what impacts the cells and tissues. So we'll take these one at a time. Where do you stand on it? Do you think that we can just testing 25 vitamin D is appropriate?
I would say the last few years have been a complete unlearning and relearning of everything, because now I'm much more considerate of the entire biochemistry. So the only thing, okay, big picture, if vitamin D is high or low, to me, this is not my statement. Maybe you've heard this other places. I think it's a signpost of inflammation or dysfunction, which is a much shorter way of what you just said. The only thing I would add was maybe kidney dysfunction as well, right? Where that's D2 is converted into D3.
Yep, that's possible.
Stress.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Stress. We'll call it stress, not total dysfunction. So for me, I like to look at A and D in ratio together. So vitamin A retinol should be 2.5 to 3 times what vitamin D is in the blood. I am aware of your stance on this. And actually, I had a meeting with my associate this week, and we actually talked about you because she said, I remember on your podcast, he talked a lot about this. And so that's kind of my stance is this is funny because I don't know if I should say it like this. I don't put nearly as much value in vitamin D independently as I maybe used to, right? When people are deficient in vitamin D, they might feel like muscle. I would say like if they're really deficient, I see fatigue and like muscle pain. And so I really like to look at, I think the bottom line is I really like to look at symptoms next to it, but I like to look at a bigger picture. What's your vitamin A and relationship to your vitamin D? Can we support this with food-based sources, cod liver oil that's already in this synergistic form? Is your vitamin D overall low? Does it need to be supported a little bit? But I look at that in a bigger picture. And I think you look at it even for me, I'm not pulling all those markers that you are for that, simply because there's it was when I like evaled the cost of what it and like what the ROI was, I was like, this is not the most valuable marker only for me. Like I want to look at these other ones too. So I'm just that's kind of where I'm at on that.
But I
I
think we're
agree.
in the same
I agree
ballpark,
with you.
right?
Yeah,
We don't assess it appropriately and for the listener, when your doctor just runs a 25 OHD and they say, oh, you're low, you need to take vitamin D, and you're taking 3,000 a day, 5,000 a day, 10,000 a day, and you're still low, that's a
There's issues.
huge issue. And as Krista was saying, there's a ratio between vitamin A and vitamin D, and nobody pays any attention to vitamin A, and yet it probably plays as big, if not bigger, a role in cellular health and physiology. So that piece, that piece of it, go ahead.
I just want to add to that because people will say, "Oh, I don't even trust this girl. She's talking about not like look at all the research we have on vitamin D and immune system, and I need to take this for my immune health." I mean, there is nothing more devastating to your minerals than your forever supplementation of vitamin D. And by the way, you're also forever supplementation of zinc. Those were not good choices. But let's defend vitamin A just a touch more. Vitamin A is essential for the immune cells in your gut, which I look at when I'm looking at testing. And I see that suppressed all the time. And it's such a good like people talk about vitamin D like it's the end all be all immune nutrient, and it's not. Vitamin A is massively important. And if you start to research any nutrient, I feel like you get like just gobs of every nutrient does all kinds of things. So vitamin D got some spotlight. Cool. Good for vitamin D. But you research every nutrient, all of them are awesome. So you need to get into synergy. And that's really like the word that I feel like I want to embrace, right? Is like synergistic, sustainable nutrition equals not playing whack-a-mole with long-term supplements forever. It's synergistic and sustainable. So,
and I think when it comes to some of these things, there are studies that are out there. Oh, this does that. Many of them are not long-term studies. They're short-term studies. They're testing certain variables. Many times the outliers are tossed out of study for whatever reason. But we have so much money behind some of these vitamins now that it's almost like pharmaceuticals. Like, hey, there's a big push to push these things because look at all these suckers we got taking this stuff. And even for me, I'm usually taking most people off vitamin D supplementation for the most part. And if they're going to take it, I totally recommend you to take some cod liver oil periodically. And that's probably the better strategy as you recommended. Let's talk about two other ones that you talked about. Are you good with that, or you want to jump in with another comment?
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say that big picture, my perception is that when you're seeing your clients, you're dealing with the majority of overt thyroid dysfunction. And my perception is that and this is like what I like subclinical thyroid before it shows up on blood work. But my point in even stating that is I think that your deep dive and assessment of vitamin D becomes even more important. I think it's always important, but I think it's even more important in that overt thyroid when there's so many different shifts that can be happening if you're on vitamin D. It screws with your calcium and all kinds of things. So anyway.
Yeah. So I think one of those things that you're talking about is like what for the listener, subclinical, or what I talk about all the time is tissue hypothyroidism, which I think is a massive issue. And so if you're new to the podcast, there's glandular hypothyroidism, which means something has shut the gland down. It's not making enough thyroid hormone. And that's a whole nother discussion that we don't have time for today. But the other issue is once you have thyroid hormone in the bloodstream, whether it's from your thyroid gland or you're taking it from prescription, is it getting into the tissue and functioning the way we want it to, what we call homeostatically? And the answer is for most people, whether they've been diagnosed with a thyroid disorder or not, if they have some type of acute, chronic excessive stress response going on, they probably have downregulation of their thyroid hormone in the cells and tissues. It's not evenly across the whole body, at least at the earliest onset. It's usually in individual tissues, the ones being the most stressed. But that is kind of what we're talking about. And we can see patterns of that tissue hypothyroidism by looking not just at a comprehensive thyroid panel, but looking at other tissue indicators, lipid status, adrenal status, blood sugar status. We can get indications that there's a level of this tissue hypothyroidism going on. If you want more information on this, go pick up the book. I think the book is called The Thyroid Debacle. You can get it at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Selfless plug. So let's talk about the two other things that your doctor's going to run. What's the problem when their doctor runs, in your opinion, when they just say, okay, I'm going to check your B12 status?
My issue with that is that if you're low in I'm multiple issues. First of all, when they're checking, since I've been in practice, that reference range just continues to decline and decline and decline. It used to be like 400 something. Now it's like 293 on the LabCorp panels that I get, right? So that's because our reference ranges, of course, are based on the most essentially recent population, and the people testing this are not probably the healthiest population, right? So we're seeing this lower and lower. For me, vitamin D under 400 or 500, people might have some fatigue. I hope I said that right, vitamin B12. So this is water soluble, so this doesn't bother me to supplement short term, but the long-term answer is some kind of gut dysfunction, starting with are you digesting? Are you chewing? Are you digesting? Are you getting animal so B12 is only from animal proteins. So you must digest those animal proteins, starting with stomach acid in the gut. And then you must absorb them. You must uptake that with intrinsic factor. So this, we think that the ability to do this may decline with age, as most things may. I mean, part of me is like, does it decline with age, or is it the other things that are age related? Whatever. So you may see low B12. So if I get low B12, I will support it temporarily, but I'm working on gut stuff because I want you to have enough B12. It kind of feels like a cloud walking around. Then if they're testing vitamin B9 or folate, I don't have a lot of conventional providers testing this for people. This is also a water-soluble nutrient. Probably one reason that they would do this is because there's talk about MTHFR. So I don't know, are your clients coming in with this? Like, are people actually have it being tested for this often conventionally?
Yeah, but they are.
I don't see it a ton.
So I see a lot of people getting tested, and probably because they asked their physician for, I want you to test my B12. The problem is, we're testing what's
I was on folate already. Go ahead, keep going.
It's this for B12 for listeners. They're testing your B12 status. If you're taking B12 supplementation, when you're taking it, the levels are probably going to be higher. But it's not really a marker of what's happening inside the cells and tissues. And so if you really want to see, is the B12 I'm taking effective inside the cells and tissues, B12 in the serum is a terrible marker to assess that on its own. And so you could have high values and somebody say you're taking too much B12, but if you look at tissue indicators of B12 status, you may see that they're B12 deficient. So what tests could you look at? How about homocysteine? That's a good indication of what might be going on. How about we look at red blood cell indices? We can get an idea of what's happening there from a B12 status. So if we're really going to look at what's going on in the cell, we can look at tissue indicators. So homocysteine, RBC indices, we can look at methylmalonic acid, whether it's through blood or serum. Much better assessments of what's going on inside the tissue. But I don't have a problem with measuring B12 in serum as long as you have something to compare it to inside the cells and tissues to say, hey, if it's low, do my cells and tissues indicate I'm low, or maybe I'm just super efficient at using it. But if it's low in the blood and the tissue indicators indicate deficiency, then there's a need. And then we start asking those other questions like, why are you deficient? What are you eating? Do you have stomach acid? Like, those are the questions. From the folate side of things, the issue is what we're measuring is folic acid. This is either supplementation or it's an oxidized form of folate. That's not really what's inside the cells. And so what we really want to do is, if we want to look at folate status, we can look at our RBC indices. We can look at different organic acid markers maybe to get an indication. We can take a look at our homocysteine level again as a potential indicator. We can look at white blood cell levels. There's a number of things that we can look at on a blood panel to say, is folate potentially deficient? But folic acid is not a marker for good status of folate. one of the leading B9 researchers in the world. I've talked to him multiple times on this. He's like, it's oxidized. You're measuring oxidized folate. So you can run RBC folate. You can look at other values, but folic acid, which is on the lab report as folate, is not, we're not measuring B9 efficiently and how it works in the cell. That's my point of view.
No, that's
So
awesome. So the
now,
other couple
let's
tests,
get into the others tests. Yeah.
and I won't spend a lot of time on them because I don't really use them anymore. And even trying to remember which doctor created what. So for many years in practice, I used Spectre cell micronutrient tests, and people have all kinds of feelings about this. It's supposed to be intracellular, right? Looking at more of it's like the hemoglobin A1C of micronutrients. What I really care about is results with people. Did I find it clinically relevant? And did I see the symptoms that people were presenting with similar? I did. Do I have colleagues that felt differently? Absolutely. It used to be covered by insurance. Then it was no longer covered by insurance. They did some admin things. I really liked the micronutrient mentor I had there, had good results with that. The other one that I did test is the Vibrant micronutrient test. So the previous one had like 34 different vitamins and minerals that you looked at. The Vibrant one, I don't remember how many, very similar, a couple extras. It had omega-3s. They varied how they tested each nutrient based on supposedly the research for that nutrient. Maybe it was RBC, maybe it was serum, maybe they were all a little bit different. Some of them they measured in a couple different ways. That one, for me, I didn't find as clinically relevant, even though it sounds better when I just described it. But regardless, it still didn't solve the problem, which was I wanted sustainability and synergy, not long-term whack-a-mole supplementation where you take this supplement and then you need to take another supplement. So regardless, I was ready to move on from that. Did people have good results from it? If my mother, who was not really, I would say my clients are usually like very health savvy people that are going to want to do a comprehensive thing. If I was trying to help my mother, who was maybe not going to do all the things, but she's got stuff going on, do I think I could run this nutrient test on her and help her with some symptoms? Sure. Right? I feel like I could, like she would be the right audience for that potentially, because that age group, what she's got going on, et cetera, et cetera. I know that there's things there that could be really supportive and helpful for her. In my practice now, I no longer use these things because I'm looking for that synergy and supplementation. So I told you I would tell you, feel free to interject here, but I told you I would tell you those couple tests, but then kind of walk you through really quickly the timeline of like practice and how things evolved essentially. So I'll jump to that unless you have anything you want to.
Nope, go. I got a bunch of questions, but go for it.
All right, cool. So I already said like 2015-ish, I had this massive eczema breakout. It had happened after taking my kids to the swimming pool for a week, which I actually think is related to the big picture story, which we'll see if we get to. So 2017, that takes a while to heal from because I didn't know what I was doing, couldn't find people to help me, which is funny because now I work in eczema. Now I have like this I'm very empathetic about it. And now it's like very clear all the things that were wrong. In 2017, I was working for a fitness celebrity, creating an intermittent fasting program. And many things, it just started with good intentions, right? Like when someone decides they're going to do this intentional experiment around eating vegetables, and then before you know it, they go to a restaurant and they're just ordering buttered noodles because they can't get what they want. And so I just think like we're human. So I ended up just eating coffee for breakfast, right, and undernourishing, which caused stress to my adrenals, and then a bit of a collapse to what was going on, the adrenal thyroid relationship, in my opinion. My brain was not good. I was having the symptoms of like not great adrenal and thyroid function. So that was sometime after 2017, 2018, 2019, et cetera. So in 2019, I went through my first programming around hair tissue mineral analysis, and I thought it was like, nope, not for me. Okay, like the person I learned it from, it's too many supplements. She kept talking about all these bad reactions people were having. It was not the answer I was looking for, even though I had many people in my circle that were like, oh yeah, I love this. First person I learned it from, not a good fit. I should acknowledge that I had actually gone to a Nutridyne conference. I thrown some notes away on this a year ago, and I had gone to this Nutridyne conference with a lot of chiropractors in like 2009. And I'd learned about HTMA testing there too, which is funny because at that time I was like, absolutely not. So then in 2020, I was on this girls trip with a lot of other dietitians, and we had we mostly talked about vitamin A and minerals all weekend, and that's what happens. Sometimes you just get in a room with different colleagues and you start having your mind open to some different things. So I learned a new way to evaluate, to look at mineral analysis that was very food-based. And it changed everything for me because it was this sustainable synergy that I was looking for, where the end result was much more food-based. There was an order of operations. It was able to make, so I told you earlier, it was so frustrating to me if I would help someone correct what was going on in their gut. They were having all kinds of great results. And then let's pretend like in the future, they're like, oh, I'm having a little bit more like gas and bloating. I'm not sure what's going on. And in retrospect, a lot of these people were dealing with what I call subclinical hypothyroid or sluggish thyroid overall. And that was my picture. So when I got my mineral results back, my adrenals were not looking so hot and my thyroid ratio was hella sluggish. So as I started supporting that, and there's some other things that were really helpful in this, and we can talk about them. So now when I look at this is like my favorite clinical picture, because these people are not getting these people are getting missed by good practitioners, definitely all their conventional practitioners, right? Because we don't recognize adrenal stuff in general, conventionally, but even from my favorite sweet spot is this thyroid issue and thyroid dysfunction before it turns into this glandular or showing up on testing dysfunction. So for me, I was so happy to find this. And so I did not have, some of the top 3 thyroid symptoms. I did not consider myself fatigued, but I think people that are used to pushing and high performing and maybe being able to even like support themselves in other ways, they can maybe say like, I don't feel super fatigued. But when I was under more stress, I would have more hair loss. I wasn't like super cold, but under more stress, maybe I'd notice like a little bit more chill, right? But the big one that I was really surprised about was brain fog. And that would have been a weak term in my perspective. I would have called it like just trouble focusing. Thought I had ADHD. I really feel like ADHD symptoms and sluggish thyroid symptoms are like very similar now. So I thought I had ADHD, like jumping all over the place. I did, as part of my kind of like experiential learning, when I was starting to kind of look at this in a different way, I did the iodine loading test from Hakala Labs. And I think I didn't catch this, but one of my clients pointed this out to me, because the week that your episode published, I also published an episode with Dr. David Brownstein, who I'm sure you know. And so just because I find you guys both 2 incredible people in the thyroid space, but maybe very different opinions, and that's okay. So anyway, my client said, oh, I remember Dr. Eric saying this, and then you had Dr. Brownstein's episode on iodine, a little bit more on iodine. So Hakala Labs has an iodine loading test that Dr. David Brownstein really loves. You pee in a jug. But what you have to do that is you take a 50 milligram iodine tablet before you do it. For the 3 days after I did that test, which by the way, sat in my bathroom for months because I didn't want to do this test because it's just annoying to carry on a jug of pee all day, right? So that sat around forever. For the 3 days following taking that test, I was like, I am on fire with focus. I was like, what in the hell happened? What did I do the other day? Like, I need to repeat that. So, according to the test, I was very deficient in iodine, which can be a cofactor in thyroid function. And so that was like a lot wrapped into this hair tissue mineral analysis. And I'd be happy to talk about like some of the specific nutrients that are just game changers with food for people dealing with the same thing I was dealing with.
Yeah. So couple things as you kind of talked about that stuff. So hair tissue mineral analysis, I think is some people love it.
Sounds super hokey.
Some people there's definitely controversy around it. Everybody uses different tests. So if you use that test, that's fantastic. I do not use it. But that's okay. So I think what we need to do is explain to people a little bit about some of the sciencey behind the hair tissue mineral analysis from your perspective. And then we'll get into what it is you're assessing, and then how did those results reflect sluggish thyroid or sluggish adrenals.
Yep.
Okay, from your
Absolutely.
opinion. And then how do you and then I guess the other thing we want to do is talk about how that compares the blood,
Yeah, we
and
could.
how does somebody put those two things together. So let's
Sure.
kind of talk about what is a hair tissue mineral analysis, how does
Yeah.
it work, and
It's
maybe the
it's
validity of it.
unfortunately not very straightforward. I have lots of feelings about pros and cons. One, I also thought it was like the hokiest thing ever because we're very used to doing labs via blood. We're very familiar with it. It makes us more comfortable. So hair tissue mineral analysis is looking at hair as tissue. So blood is going to be, it's going to be a snapshot in time. It's going to usually look at the last 12 hours of what was going on in the body. Hair tissue, while it has lots of cons as well, which we can talk about, we're looking at the last few months. We're looking at under stress. Here's the bottom lines. I knew one of the most challenging things I was struggling with in practice for my clients, and also unknowingly for myself, was helping them realize what stress looked like for them and having tools they could actually do to combat it. Not just like well, this is stress, and so we're going to do this, but literally under stress, our minerals respond. Big picture for minerals is that minerals are dumped under stress response. So like potassium's massively dumped, magnesium's massively dumped. If you have other stressors like long-term vitamin D, it will really throw off your calcium and stick it into tissue instead of in circulation where it needs to be like clotting blood or in bone. It'll like mess up the natural order of things. So that can be a stressor as well. So what hair tissue mineral analysis is looking at is the byproduct of stress, and then gives you a tool in an order. I always like to call it like Noah's Ark, and this makes sense from biochemistry. We must have a good sodium potassium pump. Let me start there. We must have an effective sodium potassium pump for every cell to work. When your cortisol has been running high, you are dumping out potassium. When your body is trying to manage aldosterone and regular.
So when you're saying, for the listener, when we're talking about this mineral analysis, we're looking at different types of minerals, sodium, potassium being two different minerals and maybe we should talk about what the sodium potassium pump is for people, why that's important. And then when you say you're dumping, are you saying in a more hyperadrenal state? I want to clarify because a lot of people aren't familiar with what a sodium potassium ratio is or why it might be or how that relates to adrenal function.
Yeah. Slow me down or interrupt me at any time. So there's lots of minerals on this test. I give a lot more gravity to a handful of them, the ones that I find most important. So we're going to talk a little bit about sodium, potassium, calcium, and magnesium. Those are the primary ones. And then there's others, kind of secondary: iron, copper, zinc, others. And then there's some third level ones, including cobalt. I'm just picking out some of the ones I care about.
Yep. Well, let's definitely start with like sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, because those are like the biggies right off the bat.
Those are the first four. You might be familiar with taking these in the form of electrolytes, because often electrolyte products are full of these products. So I was mentioning that potassium, so when cortisol is elevated, we use up potassium in the cell. So we'll see lower, you can see it look high on that. So the thing that would drive someone crazy if they didn't know how to interpret this is that high is not high, low is not just low. Like if you're high, if the number is really, there's a good ratio, there's a good spot to be like sweet spot. And then if it's really high, you're actively depleting it, but you haven't used it all up yet. If it's really low, you've used up what you had, all the stores you had, and now it's depleted. And now, because the cell has a sodium and potassium pump, and that's how everything gets in and out of the cell, essentially. If you don't have the nutrients to operate the sodium, I always like to think that they're kind of like, I love analogies. So I call these two the doormen. If you don't have adequate doormen to usher nutrients in and out of the cell, you can just go ahead and take magnesium for the rest of your life and maybe not even get it repleted, because it comes second. And no, in this conversation, sodium and potassium go first, and then calcium, magnesium get addressed next. But they're all the first four. So you can spend a lot of time with just these couple. So what I was saying with sodium, and then I'm going to compare this to blood because this is such a good, clear one on comparison to blood. With sodium, when your body is managing your blood pressure for you, let's say you're giving a presentation. If you were like me, maybe you were pitting out when you were giving a presentation in high school. This is probably my body trying to regulate my blood pressure, keep it normal. Maybe I'm showing signs of things. I'm dumping out sodium in my sweat, right? So when it's trying to control this blood pressure, it will use up sodium. In regular blood testing, if your sodium and potassium are off, it's not good for you, right? You might be presenting to the ER because you feel so terrible. These are the first labs they draw to assess how are you doing. But before someone gets to that point, it'll show up in the tissue like a long, long, long time before. With sodium, potassium, sometimes you're depleted in both of them. But often it's easier to be depleted in potassium and not sodium, just because of how our diets are. It's easier to get more sodium in as food than it is to get the amount of potassium in as food. The average person needs 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams of potassium per day. And if we count that up, what does that look like? A potato with skin, a banana, and avocado, those are all my big three. They range between 600 and 900 milligrams of potassium. So if we just start to calculate how much potassium we're taking in, it's not common, average, normal for us to replete the amount of potassium that we are sometimes spending on our cortisol. So let me give you an example. This rate of speech for me is obscenely slow. I did not know. I knew I talked fast. You should meet my family. My sisters are all fast talkers. My mom's a bit of a fast talker. So this is kind of important because I was I don't really think I have stress, but I was dealing with some eye twitching periodically, especially if I would drink more coffee, right? Things that raise my cortisol. I know what this means. This means I'm had magnesium issues, right? So I take magnesium, it would go away, and then it would come back. You know how much this pissed me off with the name of my podcast, Eric? I did not like it. And the reason that is called that was a play on inflammation, not because I thought I had a less stressed life at the beginning, right? But it's really been a thing to move toward. So I knew I had some stress, but I didn't really realize oh gosh, what is the real stress? For me, it was literally my fast talking was the massive thing that was increasing my cortisol all day long. This is my assessment of where this has gone and how I've improved this. Because this tissue analysis is showing me a few months, my potassium was almost non-existent. It was not good. From the moment I started loading, I call it potassium loading with food or food-based electrolytes, I immediately started to feel different and better. So when you support, this is kind of my favorite thing because it's so cool and so simple. Potassium is a cofactor for support for thyroid function. I'll say it like that. It can sensitize the cell to glucose and thyroid. I might state this differently for clients. I might say this helps thyroid maybe check into this cell, helps glucose get into the cell. So this is going to affect energy for a lot of people off the bat when we start to replete this. I am a bit of an aggressive person, so I recommend, I don't really think it's that aggressive anymore. I recommend 4,000 milligrams of potassium per day for someone. They are not going to do this naturally unless they kind of figure out how much to take. And so I usually have them do about 2,000 right away in the morning, and then some high potassium food later in the day. Not supplementing, but if there is a supplement, I will use some potassium-based electrolytes. I have seen people, normally I don't have a lot of people with high blood pressure in my practice personally, but I have seen people massively improve their blood pressure by drinking coconut water for the potassium benefit to help correct, because they've had really high sodium or sodium issues, right? Like their sodium was not they were actively depleting it, but they had a lot of stores. Like that wasn't the issue, but they were so imbalanced in the sodium and potassium. So how fun to get such cool results with something so simple. The other cool thing about this is that because sodium can be extracellular and potassium intracellular, people who especially women will complain about this a lot. They'll be like walking and they'll have like swollen hands and things like after they've walked for a while, or maybe flying or whatnot, they'll have like some water retention. Sometimes just getting that potassium back into balance, which takes some time, will correct that massively. So when you improve when you supply the door with the doorman, you can now get nutrients inside the cell. Taking a lot of oral magnesium can impair adequate repletion of sodium and potassium, mostly potassium. So potassium is kind of the underdog here overall that I see this being such a cool but simple but awesome thing for people. And I like to punctuate the hell out of stuff and underline it for people, because sometimes we just cannot get it. Like I cannot get it into someone's brain. Like I'm really serious how much potassium you need to be consuming, because we're all in a different place and not everyone's ready to improve, fully change how they're metabolizing stress in their body, right? Let's use me as an example.
Okay, so let's back this up a little bit, because I want to make sure the listeners are tracking what we're talking about.
Yeah, for sure.
We're looking at sodium potassium ratio, and
in the tissue, not in the blood.
In the tissue, and you're using the sodium potassium ratio as an indicator.
I'm not looking at that as a ratio. I'm just looking at the levels of that initially as raw elements on the test.
Okay.
So look on page 1. So the ratio, I haven't even actually addressed the ratios yet. There is a ratio for thyroid and there's a ratio for adrenals. And right now, I just want to make sure the doormen are showing up to work to get the nutrients inside the cell to improve.
Okay. So you're looking at a hair tissue mineral analysis. You're looking at sodium, potassium right off the bat. Mm-hmm. And you're saying if sodium is within its range, if potassium was within its range, are you looking at these things synergistically? Because when I look at sodium, potassium, I'm looking at the blood and we're talking about where each one of those is, but I'm always looking at the ratio of those two things to each other because they're kind of the yin and yang. Okay. So as you're looking at hair tissue mineral analysis, you're looking at the level of sodium or level of potassium in the hair.
They have optimal ranges. And am I actively depleting them? Are they high? Or have I used them up and they're low?
Okay, so let's talk about if sodium, let's talk about what regulates sodium, potassium. Where's it going? Because you're saying if it's getting used up or if it's high or it's low. What would cause sodium or potassium? Let's start with sodium. What would cause sodium to be low on a hair mineral analysis, and what might cause sodium to be high on a hair mineral analysis when you look at it?
Sodium, aldosterone is being regulated by sodium. So aldosterone is a hormone produced by the adrenal glands that regulates our blood pressure. So as our body tries to manage blood pressure, typically as a result of stress, it's going to use up sodium. If we are taking in adequate sodium via the food, we may have a store, right? But if it's really showing high on this HTMA, we're actively depleting it. We're still spending it, right? We can think of this a little bit more visually, like as we sweat, and that's full of sodium. That might give us a bit of a picture. It's not usually what I think about, but so when it's high on this tissue mineral analysis, we're actively depleting it. When it's low in the tissue mineral analysis, we have already depleted it. We do not have stores. We are low in the stores. When the potassium is, so the reason
hold on. So but I want to jump in there with the sodium, because when we think about blood sodium and we think about aldosterone's increasing the resorption of the sodium from the bloodstream or from the kidneys, right? So for the listeners, you got these minerals, and one of the ways to get rid of them we bring them in, but we got to get rid of them as well. And we use the kidneys to get rid of these things. And there's a hormone called aldosterone that's released by the adrenal physiology, by the adrenal glands, that helps kind of regulate how much sodium is resorbed and how much sodium and potassium resorbed. As aldosterone goes up, you get more sodium resorption back from the kidneys, back into the blood, and you have more potassium that's excreted from the kidneys. So that could result in higher sodium, and a relationship to high blood pressure. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but as water follows sodium. So as sodium comes in, more water comes in. Now you've got more volume that's creating more pressure. And so that's why sodium has got this bad connotation as being sodium's terrible, is bad, causes high blood pressure, causes all these issues. So we're talking about, that's from a blood perspective. So we're saying that, hey, in times of increased stress response, we might have more aldosterone production, which is then going to cause more sodium resorption, more potassium excreted from the blood into the kidneys. So we lose more potassium and we see more sodium and more fluid. So that, when you were talking about hand swelling and some of those things, right? So then when we look at the tissue piece, what would somebody under the same stressor condition where sodium is resorbed by the kidneys, what do we see on a hair mineral analysis? Do we see low sodium on the hair mineral analysis, or do we see high sodium on the hair mineral analysis?
It depends on their intake. And if they have enough in them, like they've consumed enough, it might be showing high. This is the bottom line, is stress and getting these nutrients into balance and getting them into optimal ranges. That's the bottom line, is that all of these things are showing you a picture of how you're responding to stress. So, because if I want to make it like most applicable, I guess. So when if sodium is depleted, then we need to add more to the diet, right? If the potassium is depleted, we need to add it aggressively to the diet. Otherwise, one, you don't have the dorman for the nutrients to get inside the cell. These are part of backbone. These can be utilized in the creation of stomach acid. These are massive pieces to adrenal function. Sodium is a huge one for adrenal function. So that's how this is how I'm communicating this, I guess. These are all pictures of stress. Am I actively depleting where I've still got some reserves, or have I already depleted the mineral where I'm out of reserves? Because if I don't have enough mineral in the tissue reserves, then these minerals make enzymes function, and enzymes make everything else function. So I'm most concerned if the minerals are depleted in tissue, if that's the picture I'm seeing, which, by the way, can be massively skewed if you have hard and soft water. The antidote to this is, why would that happen, right? Soft water, add sodium. I remember having someone not very long ago, and I was like, man, she just presents with like a much lower adrenal profile, which would be, usually I'd have to have a lower sodium on the test for this to show up that way. I was like, let me talk to you about this water. So there had been a miss somewhere where usually if people have hard or soft water, this is like the most obnoxious part, they should wash their hair with distilled water for a couple of weeks before taking the sample. They have dyed hair, they need to let it grow out for a few weeks, because otherwise you're going to get skewed results. I mean, there's a lot of annoyances for this as well. So what this person had was actually super low potassium. She was the person who she would have low end blood pressure, right? Lower end blood pressure. She just had all the other like adrenal stuff going on, where I was like, man, you sure seem like you should have low sodium. Let's talk about this. But she had a water softener, which made it look more normal or more at range. So that was an issue. It was a major, all tests have major issues, I think, right? And so when we're trying to get this test to be as accurate as possible, actually, I had someone recently tell me that she takes a magnesium bath every single day, and then she would wash her hair in it. So it was skewing the ratio for her adrenals, and she was like, I don't think this is right. So that does happen, where things are skewed. But the bottom line is, how is your body responding to stress? What information are you taking from this? Because the issue, and this is where I was kind of before, I think, in the story, is that people have stress, but sometimes they don't realize. I didn't realize that like a zillion back-to-back calls all day long without much of a break was a stressor for me. So I talk fast. So it's increasing my heart rate, increasing my cortisol. So I was dumping the hell out of these minerals. And so as a result, I was super depleted in mostly potassium, but my sodium was not optimal either. And so what do I do with that information? Was I support with food-based nutrients, supporting those. So I'm supporting with a minimum of 3,000, if not 4,000 milligrams of potassium. And the difference people see immediately is energy, maybe a difference in fluid retention. Another really big one is, this was fun, is sometimes that's the catalyst to good motility in this subclinical thyroid picture for me. Because once you have these cofactors, and it's like, I'm able to, and by the way, if you're overdoing, like, what's the worst case scenario if you take in too much potassium? If you're taking it via food, this is like why this is a food first approach. Like, I would not be recommending someone take random supplements for this, but with food, the worst case scenario, if you took in too much, and I believe that your phospholipid layer is like also not in good shape. So you talk a lot about cell danger response. This is my version of this. Like, can't get the damn grass into the soil because it's so dried and like fried from inflammation. It's how I think of inflammation, drying up the cell, a cell danger response. When the worst thing that could happen if someone takes in too much potassium with food is they maybe have a little loose stool. And then I would reassess. I'd say, oh, sounds like we're not getting that into the cell very well. That's how I see it actually present in people.
Okay, so I have a couple questions on that. So I just want to kind of summarize. If somebody has excessive stress, the pattern, if they do a hair tissue mineral analysis, is likely to be low hair sodium and or potassium, either one of those. That's how you're kind of assessing low adrenal function, is saying, hey, excessive stress. So are we saying excessive stress and just saying, hey, with excessive stress, you deplete both sodium and potassium? Or are you saying, if I have a hypoadrenal state, I'm going to have a certain pattern with sodium potassium, or if I'm in acute stress, I'm going to have a certain pattern? I'm just trying to kind of define how we're determining, because when we're saying there's an adrenal pattern, what is the adrenal pattern?
Yeah, you're totally right. I wish I could share my screen right now. I'd just show you this test. Let me draw you like a touch of a picture. On this test, you look at the individual nutritional elements first, and then you look at ratios, and the different ratios indicate different things. So there's two ratios I really love. The thyroid ratio is the calcium potassium ratio. The adrenal ratio is the sodium magnesium ratio. So that's what I'm looking at. But to answer your question,
sodium and
magnesium.
Sodium and magnesium you're looking at for adrenal.
Yep, and calcium and potassium ratio for thyroid. Those are my two favorite ratios here. But to answer a little bit more simply, potentially also, so like it makes it pretty clear when you go look at those ratios, when it's, if the sodium potassium ratio is high, that is a hypercortisol state or an elevated cortisol state. This person is high cortisol. They're speeding in life, like they're on 80 and a 65. And when it is depleted, so the optimal is like 4. When it's depleted, they've run out of reserves. They're out of gas. It's going to be probably under 2. So actually, like what I really care about is the clinical presentation in these people. When it's under 2, rough shape. Let's support those adrenals. Let's love on them with minerals. Let's love on them with any mitochondrial support potentially, and then any specific adrenal support. When you're doing specific adrenal support, it's totally different if you're elevated cortisol versus low cortisol, right? You don't want to give someone with elevated cortisol something stimulating, right? But you might be able to give someone something stimulating if they have low cortisol. So I really appreciate this for the low cortisol people. I care about it for everyone, but I really love it for the low cortisol, because I said a moment ago that if it's under, so optimal is like 4, but if it's under 2, it's they really need to love on those adrenals, like rehab them, nourish them, like very much nourish the adrenals, which I think massively affects the results with the thyroid. And if it's under 1, those people are going to be the people who tell me that they have weird reactions to different things. Like they're more sensitive. Maybe other people have called them a little bit of an anomaly in practice. Like below a 1 on that adrenal ratio, I'm like, they start telling me there are weird things happening to them. I'm like, oh, let me go check. Oh, you're less than 1 in the adrenal ratio. I am not shocked by any of this. Clinical presentation. This is like what I really care about is what works for people and like them getting better and having decreased sensitivity to this. What I'm trying to say is when your adrenal function is sad, when you're out of reserves, when you're out of gas, it's like you've lost the bumpers in the bowling alley to be resilient for something. And it's like everything's going in the gutter, sort of. And you can take in something, you'd be like, oh, I had this really weird whatever when I tried this one supplement. I mean, things that like should not really usually cause issues with people. We've all seen this, right? Like this is the reality, in my opinion, this is the reality of where we currently are with people and health. The last 3 years have been hella stressful. It's like really accentuated this. And now people have suboptimal adrenal function. They're more reactive to things. They're more depleted. They're more malnourished, I think, than they've ever been. So for me, I love being able, because we're humans, so we love validation. And I love being able to show them, hey, look, you're very validated here. Is it always perfect? No, because nothing's perfect. But hey, you're really validated here. You know, your adrenal ratio is like less than 2. Here are the nutrients we're really going to support. I'm going to always be really holistic and support. Like I'm not going to just like randomly support one. When potassium's low and sodium is like adequate and you're actively dumping it, I'm not suggesting you take in like a whole bunch more sodium. I'm suggesting you really up your potassium to bring those 2 into balance, kind of as you said earlier. So those are the 2 doormen, and then calcium, magnesium come next. And all 4 of those are related to these 2 ratios that I really like.
So we were just talking about sodium potassium ratio, right? Mm-hmm. But you said the ratio you use for adrenals is sodium magnesium.
It is, right. But I'm looking at the levels of sodium potassium first as individual elements to assess, hey, can this person even get nutrients into the cell before I jump to the next point? Because those are of the first 4 minerals that you focus on those 2 first, because you can't get it in the cell, then nothing really matters. So if someone has, so maybe the question is next, okay, you say it's a sodium magnesium ratio for the adrenal ratio. Why am I not just supplementing or supporting or taking in more sodium magnesium? Well, you got to make sure that your potassium is adequate. If you're just like supplementing the heck out of magnesium orally, you may not get it into what we see is that you do not get it into, you may not replete this. You may not replete this long term. You want to make sure the doormen have the door open. Otherwise, how's that dang magnesium getting into the cell? My feeling with magnesium is it's wildly important. I'm sure we can agree on that. Wildly important. It is also dumped under stress, depleted under stress. We know that. But even not great form, but it's hard to replete. And I always say it's easier to burn their house down with stress than it is to replete. For some people, it can take them a long time to replete these minerals. It takes longer to rebuild this house. It's not efficient. I actually asked people to do it really topically, like take Epsom salt baths if possible. And that doesn't seem to have, I don't seem to have issues with that too. I mean, anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. But my point is that what I want to say here is that people can take, I think that certain types of magnesium are absorbed better. Certain types of mineral magnesium are absorbed better and some are absorbed much worse. But in general, even people taking like not well absorbed magnesium can have symptomatic benefit when they add magnesium to their body, right? So let me give you the very blatant example. People taking natural calm, they may feel better. Their nervous system may like relax. They may relax their period cramps, right? It's relaxing that nervous system, relaxing the musculature potentially. But I don't think citrate. I mean, the reason people take citrate often is to have a bowel movement, to push bowels, because it doesn't absorb and get into the cells very well. So I think after doing this now for a while, after using mineral analysis for a while and just seeing the results I get when I support adequate sodium, adequate potassium, and then move into magnesium, I like the results better.
Okay. So we talked about sodium and potassium. you're not looking at blood levels to see what's going on there, or do you correlate these at all?
Sometimes. I don't require people to draw blood, but they can if they want.
Okay.
You can see these maybe like on the lower ends. It's possible, but I prefer to look at it in the tissue where it's more overt. But you might say, well, I have much more experience seeing what the clinical picture is with it being kind of borderline, and I can like get the same. I would respect the concept that you maybe are getting similar information from blood, from looking at blood testing for sodium, potassium potentially. I don't do every client side by side. In fact, I'd have to look. I should look at more of them. I don't put a lot of weight in the blood potassium and sodium for me, just because, as you know, like it's just going to be kind of borderline. So that's just where I'm at with it. I look at HTMA on everyone. I do not require them to get blood. That is optional if they want to draw their blood.
Okay. So let's do this because we're getting short on time here, but I want to get a couple. We may have to revisit this conversation to get more of this, but you say that sodium magnesium is an adrenal
Ratio.
pattern, right? Is an adrenal ratio, and calcium potassium is a thyroid ratio. So tell me why sodium to magnesium is an adrenal ratio that tells us that the adrenal gland is challenged, and then tell me why the calcium potassium ratio, it represents the thyroid physiology.
Okay.
Can you do that?
Yeah, I can try. So these are ratios set up. I'm actually not sure who made these ratios, if it was the lab. And I like some of the issues with this whole thing is that, as I kind of told you before, first person I learned HTMA from didn't like it, thought it was crappy. Second person was very food-based. So you can get, and I'm sure every test is like this, depending on who you learn it from, you can learn different things. There are a couple testing companies that do this kind of testing. I use Trace Elements Incorporated. It feels like they're operating out of 1982. It's just kind of old school. I mean, they will share some things. They're like, well, we go through this like they will pull some of the literature of different things for you if you ever need it. But I'm pretty sure it's them. There are I think like 8 different ratios, and a lot of them I don't find nearly as clinically relevant as these 2 that we're talking about today, which is kind of why we're focusing on that. And I also think that if your adrenals are in tough shape, your thyroid would not work properly. So I can answer the thyroid ratio one, I think, a little bit better than the adrenal one. And
Okay.
maybe big picture to make it just relevant for people. I could talk about here's what I do in adrenals, and maybe it helps answer the question a little bit. So for calcium and potassium to be the thyroid ratio, I don't know if this will adequately answer it at all. I'm sure not. But both of these nutrients are highly involved in thyroid, the nutrient cofactors for thyroid metabolism. So potassium helps sensitize the cell for both for thyroid, or to help the thyroid check into the cell, and that's kind of how I say it to clients, as well as sensitizing it to insulin, so glucose can be better controlled. So we're seeing that there's a relationship with potassium there. With calcium, we know that calcium has a big relationship with thyroid. I want to mention that one thing that's throwing this ratio off, and certainly it was my story as well, was that I had high cortisol, which led to low potassium that I was not repleting with food, and I had very high calcium levels, probably from supplementing vitamin D a long time ago, like a dipstick, because that will take the calcium out of circulation, and then it'll get stored in the tissue, because the body's like, I'm not sure what to do with this. It's impacting it. We know that calcium is a big nutrient in thyroid. It affects parathyroid, et cetera. So I guess I'm not going to probably do this full service on like all the reasons that they would call it the thyroid ratio, because it's kind of established by the lab. But I just find it to be clinically relevant. Now, from the adrenal perspective, why would they? I mean, it makes perfect sense that they would use sodium. We've talked about the use of, I think we've talked about the use of sodium in terms of like how its relationship to the adrenals. But why would they use magnesium? I don't know the answer to that. When I'm looking at adrenal health, I'm looking at adrenals, loving lots of minerals, loving lots of electrolytes, loving mitochondrial nutrients, and then loving like whatever stress and adrenal support needs to happen. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer that appropriately. I'm not the one who's setting it up. I just find it useful. So sorry if I cannot.
So when we're thinking about minerals, because I want to respect your time, and we're kind of at the end of that time frame. Looking at minerals is important for cellular physiology.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of them: sodium, potassium, magnesium. There's a whole bunch of minerals. There's different ways to measure them and assess them. Some people might look at blood. We talked a little bit about that. Part of the problem is looking at some of these micronutrients in blood is it may not typically reflect what's going on in the tissue. So there's a level of interpretation, and there you may need to make sure you're running the right test. For some in functional medicine, they may find that looking at micronutrient testing is a way to assess it. And from your experience, and to some degree from my experience, I don't run those tests so much anymore because I don't really think it gives me a clear picture of the right way to assess somebody. But you're typically assessing somebody's mineral status just by taking a look at, hey, what's going on with their hair mineral analysis. That's going to give you, plus their signs and their symptoms, some insight into whether they're deficient in those micronutrients or they've got excessive amounts of micronutrients in the hair. That's giving you an indication that that's what potentially the tissue status is inside the body as well, that the hair is correlative to maybe what's going on in the liver, that's going on in the other tissue, it's going on in the muscle. Is that a fair assessment?
That's a fair assessment. And I'll just state, this is old, but if you like look up EPA and HTM, hair tissue mineral analysis, like old stuff from them is like, this is the best way to look at trace minerals. This is what we think. I mean, do I care fully? I care about mostly what my clinical picture is. I think the bottom line is what is a tool I can use to help validate someone in stress physiology? So if I know stress chemistry is a huge piece of immune system dysfunction, which causes food sensitivities, how can I help people with their stress chemistry? How can I help people with the physiological issues related to stress, which to me is depletion of minerals? I wouldn't say, I don't think there's like a ton of toxicity with minerals, actually. Maybe one area, like I got a lot of iron in my water and I got a lot of tissue storage of iron, like way too much. That's another topic for another day. But for the most part, it's like this is way out of balance. Maybe the tissue is storing it. We know like a lot of calcium stored in tissue is not where it should be. It should be circulating in blood. It should be living in bones. And so for me to see like how out of range my calcium is good, because I used to work in dialysis a long time ago. And we talked about this topic all the time. We don't want that. So I'm looking for what is something I can do to give a physiological picture of stress for someone. Is it sustainable? Is there different layers to it? Is it food-based? Is it synergistic? And then also, this is a low cost option. This is a less than $100 thing. I think probably you and I are similar on how can we reduce supplementation and testing costs for people and maximize results. For me, symptoms always come first. They're always top, in my opinion, and tests are always second. Tests do not trump the client's experience. And I've even had on this test, kind of like with the gal with the water softener, where her sodium was like looking more normal than it was. It should have been low. I've had different times on this test where it doesn't look like it sounds. So I will approach it with how it sounds instead of how I see after giving it like a minute, to see like, but if I'm not being effective, what do I really care about is results that aren't going to be harming anyone, right? Like I can support this with food, see the dials move, see people's symptoms move, and I'm a happy camper as a practitioner because that's what I really care about.
So you're using this as the tool to say, hey, there's a stress response going on. There's maybe a stress response. Your system's under stress. Maybe somebody didn't pick it up through blood chemistry. But we're going to use this tissue assessment of it. Once we see problems from a tissue assessment, I can use minerals as strategy to kind of support what's being depleted excessively under stress, while you, and correct me if I'm wrong, start to address the underlying stress ors. Is that correct?
Right. And this is there's plenty of people, high performing people that are like, I think I'm okay. I'm not stressed. I was one of those people. Like, I think I'm okay. I don't know why my eye's twitching.
Right.
Body's sending me signs, but I'm ignoring them. So this can be a helpful thing to validate, because we are humans and we love testing validation as well. So this helps validate it. Maybe it helps show the severity of it. So when someone's like super depleted, I'm like, this is just going to take a little longer than either one of us would really like. I would love to race through this, but you've got some serious nourishment to do. So it's helpful in that manner. And some of where this comes from, and I'm not like an all in, I'm not necessarily in the posse for this or the club, but there's a whole corner of the internet that talks a lot more about this, called the pro-metabolic space. And there is a methodology called root cause protocol that kind of talks about this from, I think, a decent, like a very science-based, decent food-based. And that's where even the person I got distilled interpretation skills from, that I really like, a clinician friend of mine, it all came out of root cause protocol stuff with Morley Robbins, is part of where this comes from, if you've heard of him. So
I've heard of Morley.
You may have, and he is a quirky guy. So
yeah.
I have not learned what I know from Morley directly very much. But I respect what he's trying to do, and I respect that it's food-based, sustainable, and we're trying to get synergistic. So
listen, I think Morley is trying to come to answers, right? And he puts a lot of time and effort and into the science and the research. And so I think he's brought some things to light. He's opened some eyes and maybe different ways to look at things. He distilled previous information down to and brought it into the light and said, hey, people were talking about this before, and maybe here's how it ties together. So I think a lot of the things he says are worth listening to and taking some note of. I think there's another side of that too, which is, this is the way it is. I know the way it is. And I think that's a little abrupt sometimes. And unfortunately, we don't all have the answers. And much of what we think today, we're going to be proven wrong tomorrow in the science. We're going to be like, but how did I get people well with that? Well, sometimes even good intention helps somebody get well and get better. So I think there's, none of us definitely know the answer. We just don't, right? So everything is hypothesis and theory, and we try and put those hypotheses and theories into practice. So that way we can try and help our clients, help our patients feel and function better. But we're all working with our own level of ignorance and our own level of bias. And and the challenge becomes, sometimes when we go outside that bias, or somebody starts bumping into our biases, we go, ugh, right? And maybe there is something else. Even I don't do hair tissue mineral analysis. I don't know that it may be work perfect for you, and it may be what I don't think it's right or wrong. It's just a level of ignorance for me, which is why I'm trying, I'm through this thing. I'm like, okay, let's try and redefine it so that we can, as people who aren't familiar with it, can say, oh, maybe that's something I need to look into, because that's not something I've heard before. So let's kind of finish up. We might have to do another one of these and kind of get more into what's going on here, because feels like 2 hours or an hour and a half went by like that. But let people know where they can hear more about you, if they want to learn more about what you do, what your podcast, where they can find it. And if they're interested in maybe working with you or learning more about hair mineral analysis, give them that kind of information.
Cool. Well, first, I would just say, to punctuate what you said, is that there's more than one way to do everything. So I was happy to have you on because I think you're a thought leader in the thyroid space, and a well-needed one. And I think those who already have diagnosed thyroid issues, well, they're certainly not being served. But as you pointed out in a different way earlier, those who are before the diagnosis are also not being served. And I think that this has been a useful tool so far. And I'm honestly, I feel like still a baby. I've only been using this for 2.5 years, maybe. And that's pretty elementary, in my opinion. That's okay. So I still have a lot more I would love to know about this as well. And I still always put client results as like top priority. Of like, no one really gives a crap if nothing works. Like, that's all that matters. And one more thing on like morally root cause protocol stuff, man, a lot of that stuff has been really uncomfortable. Unlearning, relearning. It's like, oh, well, of course there's an iron recycling system and we should be able to make our own with all the right nutrient cofactors. So I've appreciated that stuff. So my podcast is called The Less Stressed Life. The reason it's called that is because I was looking for a layperson synonym for inflammation in 2017 when I started it. And that's what I landed on. And it's been this like beautiful journey of, we can talk about all the things contributing to stress, from emotional, physical, or structural, and nutritional. So did I say them all? Emotional, nutritional, and structural. So all of that's fair game for that umbrella. I'm over at Less Stressed Life, and I'm at christabiegler.com.
Awesome. All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. I have to do it again and get a little deeper into what's going on. If you'll come back on and we can chat about it. For the listeners, you might want to listen to this because we kind of went into some of the sciencey stuff and kind of got a little deep in there. So maybe listen to it again. If you have somebody, a family member, friend, or yourself that's struggling with chronic stress, chronic fatigue, the outcomes of those things, obviously you can go to Christa's podcast and listen to that because she talks about it on a regular basis, and some of the strategies that you might be able to use to help improve your health and well-being. Other than that, Christa, I'll let you go. Thanks so much for being on the podcast, and maybe do this again in the next couple months and have finish the conversation. Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me, and I love when people ask difficult questions. So thanks.
You bet.